Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexi the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. We have the American Prospects executive editor, David Dayen, back for another appearance. My boss here, so I'll try to be more polite than usual. Welcome, David.
Good to be back.
So we had a plan here. We're going to talk about the Salton Sea, but I think first we got to talk about Sam Bankman-Fried. Just as I was coming home from dinner, news broke that Sam Bankman-Fried has been arrested by the Bahamian government after the U.S. attorney from the Southern District of New York showed them a sealed indictment, and he's expected to be extradited to the United States. So, David, you were on Jon Stewart's podcast talking about Sam Bankman-Fried, and he was...
I'm sorry I didn't give you the exclusive, by the
way. We'll let it slide this one time.
All right.
But, he was going to do these hearings, and that's probably out of the question. What do you think this means, like, in an immediate sense, in terms of the whole, like, crypto political discussion?
Well, I just think it's funny that this guy picked the one tax haven in the Caribbean where we do have an extradition treaty. You know? I mean,
whoops.
do a little more research next time. But, I mean, I think this was inevitable. I actually did predict on Jon Stewart's podcast that he would be arrested eventually, and I didn't necessarily think it was going to happen this week. But I think that when you look at the fact pattern of what we know about it, and even more information came out when the appointed CEO of FTX, I believe his name is Mr. John Ray, he's sort of one of these guys who's a serial cleaner up of fraudulent enterprises. Like he dealt with the Enron bankruptcy. He was appointed in that process as well. And he gave testimony in this hearing that SBF was supposed to be at. He also was scheduled to testify. And I assume that testimony will still go forward. And he gave more information. I mean, he's sitting there. He has access to all the files. He's digging through whatever he needs to dig through. And he gave some more information on that in his prepared testimony. And one of the things he said was among the losses was $1 billion given as loans and payments to quote unquote insiders, which is kind of a no-no, right? As if this wasn't bad enough that you didn't segregate customer funds and instead use them to place big bets that you lost. Apparently you just handed out the money like parting gifts on the dating game. So, obviously there was some criminal, activity contemplated and executed in this situation. So no surprise to me that he's going down for it. I do think that what we're seeing elsewhere in the crypto world actually is more perilous for the enterprise as a whole. So earlier this week, both two of the remaining exchanges, Binance and I believe Coinbase, put out what they called a proof of reserve report that was done by this accounting firm called Mazars, which was the firm, by the way, that Trump used. But set that aside. These proof of reserve reports have, I think, 3 numbers on them. Like they're supposed to give people confidence that
as long as there are numbers, Dave, as long as there are numbers, that's what matters.
They're supposed to give people confidence that these exchanges are, thoroughgoing enterprises. And I think there's a big, giant, whopping disclaimer at the top of them that says this really is a preliminary and doesn't really explain the extent of the accounting at these companies. And they clearly were BS. These papers, and questions remain about the stability of the finances at these other exchanges. And really with the demise of FTX, Binance and Coinbase are pretty much the main games in town. So I see more pain in the future of the crypto industry.
Yeah, it was, when the Financial Times got a hold of FTX's balance sheet, quote unquote, it was like a Google Doc, and one of the cells said hidden, poorly internally labeled fiat account, and it had negative $8 billion in it. Like, what is that? And I guess it goes to show you that,
you do that on your checkbook, right? You just, I screwed up by $8 billion on my checkbook. I'll just put in a line item adjustment here, and then I'll get back to the proper accounting.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that and the these documents coming out of Binance and Coinbase, and then also there's reporting that Tether, which is the biggest stable coin, if I'm not mistaken, that's under suspicion now because they may have been loaning their coins to their customers instead of taking, it's supposed to be 1-to-1, $1 of assets per one stable coin. And now you've got loans on there, and loans are more risky than like liquid assets. So, if
what
that
is a
blows
stable
up,
coin, if I may ask? What's a stable coin?
A stable coin is an attempt to recreate the dollar. So, it is. I mean, it's a way for people to trade in digital assets without the volatility of digital assets. So, if you trade in Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes from $40,000 to $17,000, you have a problem. Suddenly you can't buy as much if that's what your account. But if your account is in a stable coin, it's basically pegged to the US dollar. And then you can do your trading in digital assets summarily. Why we needed to recreate the dollar is a question maybe for another time. But yeah, in fact, I wrote a piece last week that showed that, in fact, all the major stable coins are being issued by firms that are under investigation by the U.S. government in one way or another. And so this entire enterprise is built on a house of sand. And, the other funny thing I saw was that FTX had this internal chat group, and the name of the internal chat group was Wire Fraud. So, they weren't exactly subtle about their various aims. And, it just does not look good for crypto writ large.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you take customer money and you're promising to hold it in an exchange, not a bank, so that you can like move it around, not invest it in somewhere else, every time you do that would be wire fraud, if I'm not mistaken.
Certainly, if there was lending going on, particularly payments to insiders and lending to insiders, that would absolutely constitute wire fraud. Now, it may have not been done in the United States, and there are issues there. But clearly, and we're going to see the sealed indictment on Tuesday. They're going to unseal it. Clearly, there's just a ton of smoke here. There's also questions as to whether FTX had a role in the implosion of another stablecoin, which was Terra. Terra and Luna it was this algorithmic stablecoin that was supposed to correct itself and always stay at the $1 peg. Didn't work out that way, and apparently FTX trading on Terra may have played a role in the volatility that led to its demise. There's just a whole mess and mountain of fraud here, and it's not like we're that far away from 2008 when the mortgage market was essentially a big mountain of fraud. You have to say that whereas it took the Obama administration infinity years to prosecute anyone in connection with its large fraud that happened actually before its watch. In this case, the Biden administration's Justice Department took all of 1 month before making and arrest here.
Yeah, and this was the question I was building up towards, was that, do you think this could potentially be a new era of accountability? Because as you say, you had epic fraud, whether or not people got convicted for it. I mean, all these banks have had to pay numerous settlements. Usually for a long time, it was like you didn't have to admit fault, but you'd pay the SEC, $100 million, $2 billion for basically defrauding investors. Nobody went to jail except for one guy over the housing bubble. And then you had this, industrial scale mortgage document fraud, as you wrote about in your book, Chain of Title. Right. The banks, these servicers had the mortgage note, the mortgage paperwork had been all mixed up and lost in the process of slicing and dicing all of these mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations. So when they're going to foreclose on people, they didn't have the documents. So they just made them up, right. Probably millions of them, just to have, the stamps right, And so they had these guys making like $13 an hour, just doing document fraud like 100 times a day,
signing other people's names.
Yeah.
Mass forgery, mass fabrication documents used in courts. As legal instruments. Yes. Yeah. And I think a few low level people got busted for that, but none of the big chiefs. Lorraine Brown, who ran DocX, which was one of these document fraud and fabrication shops down in Alpharetta, Georgia. She did go to jail for a few years. But incredibly, in that conviction, they said that she was acting as a conspiracy of one, even though she had customers, right? I mean, she was making the documents for somebody, but apparently those people were just innocent dupes to this one woman mastermind scheme to mass produce millions and millions of documents.
And that seems that culture of impunity we've had for the last, 15 years plus seems, I would think, to be bearing fruit in SBF and these just comically ridiculous balance sheets, to where, the Enron guys, this is way worse than anything I've ever seen in my entire career. This is, Fisher Price, baby's first spreadsheet that's just ridiculously fraudulent. And it's these guys thought they could do whatever they wanted. They didn't have to follow any laws or rules or anything.
When you're a star, they let you do it.
Yeah. Well, Trump too. Well, the way that he got away with everything. So, I mean, maybe this is a potential. I mean, I guess we'll have to see how it shakes out. But to be no, there are certain things you can't do, even if you're a billionaire.
I certainly hope so. I mean, to the extent that we get accountability in this country for these types of situations, it's usually because you ripped off rich people. So Elizabeth Holmes goes to jail because she defrauded investors. So she defrauded the wrong person, Rupert Murdoch, and all the other people who she duped into investing in Theranos.
Madoff. Same thing with Madoff.
Yeah, I mean, Madoff confessed, so, it wasn't that hard to get him, right? But that you raise a good point. In 2012, when the Obama campaign was going up against Mitt Romney, they ran this ad that tried to tie Mitt Romney to Wall Street. And they tried to tie him to a bunch of people who went to jail. And the Obama administration couldn't find a single person that they actually put in jail. So the ad is Bernie Madoff and the Enron guys and one of these guys, Dennis Kozlowski from Tyco. They couldn't count to three or even one on individuals, corporate CEOs, corporate titans who they brought down specifically.
That's the end of the preview, folks. As usual, we like to mention that this podcast is sponsored by the American Prospect Magazine. So if you want to listen to the whole thing, you can subscribe at $5 a month if you want that, plus a free subscription to the website. plus the opportunity for a steeply discounted print subscription. You can do that if you so wish at $10 a month. And otherwise, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.